What are some signs to look for that the New York Giants are back on the right track in 2022? That's coming up next on today's Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and hope everybody had a good, long holiday weekend. We are back here on the Locked On Giants podcast, still in our summer schedule, but that's coming to a close very soon, and happy to be back after the long weekend. And as always, folks, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, I'm going to talk about some signs to look for to know that the Giants roster, the Giants organization as a whole, is back on track. Now, obviously, the bottom line is winning, but there are some things that we could look for before they actually start playing some of these games and getting into the thick of their schedules. We're going to talk about some of those things, what to look for, and what kind of signs of encouragement we can maybe seek out from this Brian Daboll-led New York Giants team. So that is on today's agenda. Happy as always to have you with us. And before I jump in, just real quick, we're planning a live show this week with the entertainer. That's probably going to be on Friday. So I'll have details for you probably by the next show we do. I'll firm that up with the entertainer. The mailbag is coming back. I know some of you have asked about the mailbag. We'll bring that back. If I get enough questions, I'll do a mailbag this week. If I don't have enough for this week, I'll do it for next week. So if you want to send a question in, obviously, you know what to do. The information's in the show notes. You can tweet it to me at Patricia_Trainer, tag it Ask P Train. You can email it to lockedongiantspodcast@gmail.com, or you can text it. The information again is in the show notes, and hope to hear from you because your questions are always very good. And I always look forward to answering those questions. All right, let's get into today's topic, which again are signs to look for to know that the Giants are headed in the right direction. And I'm going to go in chronological order here, folks. First, I'm going to start with is training camp, and specifically how they go about performing in training camp. Now, the purpose of training camp, as everybody knows, is teaching, practicing the installs, just kind of getting into your rhythm, getting back into football shape, all that good stuff. But much like what you want to see during the season, you want to see a linear line of progress. So by that, I mean, the first few practices are likely to be sloppy because the guys are coming back from, a long break. They've got to get into football shape. They're going to be sore. They're going to have to push through some things. They're going to have to refresh their memory on certain things that they might have learned in the spring. But do the mistakes? Does all that go away? Does that start to dissipate? Do they start to perform faster? Is it, at a point where they're thinking more so than just reacting based on the pace that the team comes along at during training camp? That's going to tell us how they're going to hit the ground running when this regular season starts. Now, there have been camps in the past that I have gone to, and I thought, gee whiz, the team looks sluggish. They kind of look like they're still thinking out there. They're not playing fast. I have concern about the tempo, the speed, et cetera, et cetera. I would hope, and I would like not to have any of those concerns as this training camp unfolds. Now, remember, head coach Brian Daboll in the spring focused on teaching, getting everybody up to speed on what the playbook was all about, getting everybody up to speed on techniques that the coaches desired. Now comes level 2, if you will. So basically, you don't want to see the Giants have to go back and start from scratch, because if they have to start from scratch and it gets to the point where everything they did in the spring was all for naught, that's not going to be a good sign. So I'm optimistic the Giants will be able to hit the ground running and they will show that linear progress, but they have to do it, obviously, before we could sit back and say that this team is headed on the right track. But that's the first step that I know I'll be looking for in terms of whether or not this organization is headed in the right direction. Now, what are some of the other things I'll be looking for? Stick around. I have item number 2 coming up, and that pertains to the regular season. So that's coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, BetOnline.net is the only place that offers the best information on the latest odds, contests, and player props for all your sports betting needs. No matter what sport you're into, BetOnline.net has you covered. Plus, they offer everything you need to know for live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head on over to BetOnline.net today to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Welcome back, everybody, to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina. Happy to have you with us here on the show. We are talking about some things to keep an eye out for that'll kind of give us an indication that the Giants are hopefully back on track, because there's a lot of optimism for the Giants with this new regime, a lot of goodwill, a lot of positive stuff. But we're in a honeymoon period now, obviously, and it means nothing if the team goes out and lays an egg, this season. So we're talking about some of the things to keep an eye out for that might indicate that this team is headed in the right direction. And I spoke about training camp, the type of training camp, the tempo, the quality of training camp in the first segment. Now we're going to move on to the regular season. And for me, the most important thing, and this goes for any Giants roster any year, is the first 4 games of the season. Now, the Giants in the first 4 games of the season, they are at Tennessee, home against Carolina, home Monday night against Dallas, and then they have the Chicago Bears. I believe, actually, they have 3. Yeah, they have 3 home games. So they have, they're at home against Carolina, Dallas, and the Chicago Bears. Now, if the Giants can't go at least 2-2 over that 4-game stretch, something is wrong. All right. Ideally, I'd like to see them go 3-1, but 2-2 for sure. I don't know that they're going to necessarily be able to top Tennessee. Right now, I think if you were to ask me and put me on the spot, I would probably pick the Giants to lose that game. I do think they can beat Carolina at home. I do think they can beat Chicago at home. The Dallas game, theoretically, that's a toss-up for me. The Giants just don't do well for whatever the reason in primetime games. And, Dallas has kind of, had their number for the last several games. I think the Giants are something like 1-7 against Dallas over the last 8 games that they played. But that being said, I'd like to count on the element of surprise. And speaking of the element of surprise, that's a big reason why I think the Giants can go at least 2-2, if not 3-1 in the first 4 games of the season. They are going to have that element of surprise. It's a new coaching staff, some new systems. Opponents are going to have to try and figure some stuff out. Yeah, there's some trends that maybe they can glean from, studying Buffalo's offense. But, let's be real. The Giants offense is not Buffalo. All right. It's not the same players. So it's going to be tweaked. So with that said, I do think that there's an element of surprise that the Giants can spring on their opponents. I do not think that 2-2 is out of the question. I think 3-1 is certainly a possibility, albeit a stretch right now. I think if you were to ask me right this second, which, obviously we're in the moment right now, I would say I'm iffy about that. But I don't think that you can mark that Dallas game as an automatic loss. Now, why are those first 4 games important? Because you want to come out of the gate solid. Now, I know it's not how you start, it's how you finish. I get that. But how you start, especially when it's a new team, putting everything together, is going to tell us a lot about how far this team has come, how far it still has to go. So it's going to be very telling. You want to see, ideally, the team get better and better every week. You don't want to see them look like a champion one week and then the next week they look like chumps. That you don't want to see. But you want to see linear progress from the team each and every week. I do think that's possible. Now, the Giants, they do have that tough stretch of their schedule. After those 4 games, they play Green Bay and London. Then they come home the following week and they host the Baltimore Ravens. That's going to be a tough one. Then they have a pair of games they should be able to win. They have the Jaguars at Jacksonville, and then they play at Seattle, which even though the Seahawks are kind of watered down since the last time the Giants saw them, the Giants still have to make that trip cross country to Seattle, which is a very difficult place to play in. So by the time the Giants hit the bye week in week 9, I mentioned I'd like to see them go 2-2 in the first 4 games, but let's kind of go through what I'd like to see or what I think is going to happen in those first few games before the bye week. So I think the Giants will lose to Tennessee, beat the Panthers. I'm going to say they're going to lose to Dallas right now. All right. I'm iffy about that one, but I think I'm not so sure they beat Dallas. I think they can beat Chicago. I think they lose to Green Bay. I think they can. I think they're going to have a hard time with the Ravens, but I think they can beat Jacksonville, and I think they can beat Seattle. So let's just count that up. Titans. Let's see the number of wins. So Carolina, Chicago, and I said Jacksonville and Seattle. So a 4-4 record by the bye. I'd sign up for that. Now, remember, I'm not expecting the Giants to be world beaters this first year. Can they make the playoffs? Absolutely, they can. Anybody can. But realistically speaking, I think they're going to be more competitive and closer to making the playoffs if everything falls into place and we find out about Daniel Jones, we find out if, this offense is a fit for everything that they're trying to do and so on and so forth. So I'm not quite ready to say the Giants are going to be a playoff team, but I do think they're going to be better. If they can go 4-4 before their bye week, I'll take that as a sign of progress that this team is on the right track. Now, I've got one more thing that's very important that I'm going to talk about coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, there's only one place to find what you need quickly for your car or truck, and that's at rockauto.com. RockAuto.com has over 20 years of offering competitive pricing on thousands of parts for every make, model, and manufacturer. Check out their extensive online listing of parts. And don't forget to write down Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. RockAuto.com ships direct to your door. They are competitive. They have everything you could possibly need for your do-it-yourselfers. And you can save a lot of money by going to rockauto.com. So check them out today, rockauto.com. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car or truck will ever need, rockauto.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, and we're talking about ways that we can kind of determine if the Giants are back on track. And ultimately, it's going to come down to wins and losses. I get that. But there are other things we can look for. We talked about the type of training camp that they have and how they respond. Are they showing linear progress? We talked about the first 4 games of the season and really the first half of the season and how a 4-4 record would be really nice and a big accomplishment, I think, for the Giants. It would probably be their best record to start a season, to start the first half of the season in quite some time. So that's certainly something that we can look for. But there's one other element that I want to talk about that I think is very important. And this one's kind of tricky because you just don't know what's going to happen down the line. And that is, how will the Giants handle adversity? Now, in the past, when this team has lost or when they've had an injury, specifically a huge injury, team hasn't been able to recover. So, for example, you look last year at Blake Martinez when he went down. The Giants didn't have anybody behind him really to step in there and stop the bleeding. They tried with Tate Crowder and a few other guys, but they really lost something without Blake Martinez in the lineup. You can make the same argument for Saquon Barkley when he suffered his season-ending injury. I think the good news, though, is that General Manager Joe Schoen has made it a priority to make sure he has depth across the board. Now, how good is that depth going to be? I don't know. I can't say until I see these guys practice. But I don't think it's going to be a situation where now the Giants are going to have to scramble to bring in guys off the street to fill some of the holes that develop as a result of the injuries or any kind of adversity. But, we speak of adversity. Also, like I said, what happens if this team loses games? What happens if, the offense doesn't click, for example, or the defense maybe is too complex or whatever? These are all unknown factors. And how is this team going to respond? Are the coaches going to have to simplify things? Is there going to be finger pointing? This is all stuff that can make or break the Giants' psyche or their culture, if you will. All right. The team talks about having a strong culture, being there for each other. But the bottom line is if there's adversity and there's just so much of it and it goes uncontrolled, it can wreck a season in a hurry. So that's something to keep an eye on. Now, I am encouraged that Brian Daboll and his staff will keep this together. I think one of the things they have done that I really like is they have tried to stress to the players that this is a total ownership type of deal, meaning everybody has a piece of the steak, if you will, in the overall picture, the overall program. Now, some guys obviously are going to have a bigger piece of the pie because they're in contract years or whatnot, but it's not a case of, okay, this is our program, us being the coaches and players, you just do what we tell you. We're going to try and fit, square pegs in round holes. This is a collaborative effort. Brian Daboll has tried to get this team to understand that everybody's in this together. And I know coaches in the past have tried to stress that, but, they talk about it, hasn't always been the case. This year, I think it's been the case so far. Will they rise above any adverse situations? That's the big question mark. And I'll be honest with you, folks, right now, too soon to say. I like what I've heard from the players from the spring, but you really don't know how they're going to respond until adversity hits them smack in the face. That's going to be the test. And once we see that, whether it be from recovering from a bad loss or something like that, that's going to tell us a lot about the makeup and the character and the grit of this team. And if we find that they just crumble, then, oh my gosh, we might be in for another long season. So dealing with adversity is going to be huge. And what makes it tricky, like I said, is that you just don't know if or when adversity is going to strike. And so we're just going to have to wait and see how that goes. But overall, to recap, how they're going to run training camp, the first 4 games, and then, expanding that the first half of the season, and how they handle adversity. Those are main factors on how the Giants season can be perceived, whether it's going to be a success in the right direction, or are they stuck in neutral, or have they gone backwards? I feel good about it. But then again, you know what? I tell you all the time, I'm optimistic. So seeing is believing. We'll see what the Giants end up doing. Hopefully we'll be talking about a lot more victories this year than losses, because I don't know about you, but I'm getting tired of talking about losses. I'm sure you guys are getting tired of hearing about them and watching them as well. So hopefully we'll have a better season. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us here on the LockedOn Giants podcast. Remember, we're still in our summer schedule, and because we're coming to you here on Tuesday, we'll have a show for you on Wednesday, then another one on Friday. Friday, right now, the tentative plan is a live show with the entertainer. It's going to be basically an overview, preview, and then, of course, we'll take your questions. I will firm that up with him, and I will let you know on the next show, as well as I'll put a note in the show notes once we have that all squared away. So with that said, again, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. I'm Patricia Traina. Have a great one, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.